Okay, let's go and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and hello to our European attendees. And thanks for joining for today's webinar presented by Ziflow. My name is Mike Peterbaugh, and I'll be one of your hosts for today's webinar on online proofing and project management. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Attendee lines are muted, and that's just to cut down on background noise, which I'm sure we all have a lot of these days. Our session today is being recorded, and a copy will be sent out after we finish up today, a little bit later today. So all those who registered will receive a copy of today's presentation. And we're going to take questions at the end of today's presentation, but feel free at any point to enter them during any point of the presentation today through the Zoom Q&A interface. If we see them during the course of the presentation and we can take them, we will, but most likely we'll be taking them all at the end of today's presentation. All right. Before we jump in, let's meet today's hosts. As I mentioned, my name is Mike. I'm Mike Peterbaugh, and I'm the CMO here at Ziflow. And I'm joined today by Katie Oberthaler, our brand and content manager here at Ziflow.
Good morning, everyone.
For those of you who aren't as familiar with Ziflow as others, just a quick pitch on us. Ziflow simplifies how teams review and approve creative content so they can accomplish more together. We do this by making feedback effortless, which gets teams aligned and raises the bar for review efficiency, which we're going to talk quite a bit about today. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that is probably a daily topic in our discussions with those both learning more about online proofing, as well as our customers who are looking to up their overall creative process game by integrating online proofing with project management. So today we're going to talk about how to take a strategic approach to creative project plans and workflows, really to max out visibility and alignment. And visibility and alignment is something we're going to talk about a lot today, which is really at the core of both of these solutions. We're also going to talk about some best practices about what data should live where. And we're also going to talk about how to incorporate external stakeholders into your creative workflows across the two technologies. So for those of you on the call with kind of client agency relationships going on, there'll be some really specific content for you. So let's jump right in and let's set some context for our discussion and talk about some of the challenges we're asked to help solve both in terms of deploying an online proofing solution, but also the overall creative production process. And the first challenge is not going to be a newsflash to many of you, and that's visibility. Like I said, we were going to talk about visibility and alignment quite a bit. Obviously, with all the technology that's available today, there should be no shortage of ways to provide visibility. And that's really the crux of the challenge here is for high volume teams, having to update multiple systems is a real challenge, and it's a real management drag. And what I mean by that, as far as management, I mean the overhead and the time required to do those, what effectively become dual manual updates. So the real why this is a challenge is the need to create visibility, or really transparency is another way of putting it, that doesn't require more work to be done. So how can you get that done? How can you create the visibility to satisfy the various stakeholders and team members and internal, external team members that really doesn't add on more work at the end of the day? And as it relates to the creative process, you can see here, it's a wide-ranging challenge from creative directors to project managers and ops production managers as well. So this is really one of the, probably like I said, this will be like a consistent theme through today's presentation. And really, the next challenge is really about getting a handle on the entire scope of work going on in a review process. And this is a classic tip of the iceberg situation, where the actual review and approval process has an exponential amount of activity under the waters than what might be passed on to a traditional project management solution. And this is another way of looking at the visibility challenge, really. Stakeholders may wonder why one project took a week while another took a month, without the understanding that one, maybe the one that had to go through a month's worth of review had to go through a longer compliance review cycle, or required a new version of review because of a missing disclosure was missing. So, it's really another way of kind of like looking at the visibility challenges, is that, the actual creative review and approval process is actually a pretty, labor intensive and time intensive process that might not necessarily always, manifest itself well in project management solutions. So here we're kind of at an inflection point, really. So a lot of organizations might think that the best path is to go all in on one tech or another to do what they think would simplify their lives. But what we're really seeing is that marketing leaders are still taking a best of breed approach. And that means that they're choosing applications and solutions that are designed specifically for their work challenges. As you can see here, about 57% of marketing technology leaders were either had a strong or they were leaning toward heavily their preferred was a best of breed approach. The best of breed approach was their preferred approach. So it's really, I don't really think it's one or the other. And I think it's really, and this is what we're really going to talk about today. And it's really going to take us to the next portion of the session today. And here is where I hand it off to Katie, is for her to discuss how to create synergies between your online proofing and project management systems. Because that's really what this is about. It's about synergies, and it's not necessarily about either or. And it's not about one necessarily taking a leadership position or the other. It really is how to create a really strong synergy between the two. So with that, Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Mike. As Mike mentioned, when we talk about online proofing and project management, when you're doing research on which system is best for my team, both my creative team, my marketing team, and then all the other departments or stakeholders that are involved in reviewing marketing work or just creative work in general, it's easy to think, as Mike said, I need one or the other. Should I really build out this robust project management system, or should I use online proofing as a partial project management tool? There's definitely overlapping capabilities between these different technologies, and deciding which one is right for your team really depends on a number of factors. So we see creative teams that are working out of this really intense and detailed project management structure, but they don't necessarily have, markup and approval capabilities. They want staged workflows. They need a better way to manage all of that under the surface review activity that's happening on these assets that they're creating, which are sometimes difficult to visualize in a project management tool. On the reverse side, we have kind of multi-stage projects that touch numerous departments, numerous outside stakeholders, and there's a lot of visibility into the review process that needs to happen. And that all just needs to be tracked. So it's really can be somewhat difficult to assess what is the right deployment for my organization, and how do we satisfy the needs of our creative team that's really working in the weeds of assets and probably doing a lot of versioning and need to do detailed comparisons between different versions and working on these high volume creative projects with our overall project management structure across our organization. So I want to take a step back from sort of all those considerations and the possibilities of integrating these systems and talk about that it really comes down to how you think about your project plans. So before you think about which PM tool should I select, is our current PM tool meeting our needs for review and approval? Which one should we select? Do we need online proofing? The first thing you should ask is, well, how do we think about our project plans, either within our team and within our wider organization? Considering how you structure your projects, are they structured by milestones, by workflows? Do you think of them as detailed tasks or project cards or tasks, or more swim lanes by different phases of a project? And obviously that varies from organization to organization and team to team. You can see there's different on the side here, different examples of how the same website project could be accomplished. And there's so many different subtasks and substages that need to happen within a project like that, that figuring out how to visualize it and then track that work so it progresses in a timely fashion, can go a number of different ways. So really thinking about how you want to visualize a project, and then asking yourself, do we work in multi-part projects with multiple stages and stakeholders? Coming back again to this idea of visibility, who needs to have visibility at different stages of a project, and what level of detail do they need to see, both within the project structure and within perhaps the assets and creative work that are coming out of those different stages. And then lastly, it's important to ask yourself, are our projects repeatable? Do they typically follow the same flow or template? Do we have the same task list every time? It can be extremely time consuming as a project manager, or if you're a creative director or perhaps a designer that is involved in one stage of a repeatable process, like a website redesign project, to have to build that out every time. And so where a PM tool comes in is the ability to replicate that and put structure to a repeatable project. And what we'll talk about is how to fit online proofing into those sort of repeatable steps. Or if you have a custom project every time, say you're working with a client and it's you have a kind of different project flow based on their needs every time, that will really help determine what information is the driver of your overall project management structure. So a good example for us internally, we get asked this a lot, is, what PM tool do you use at Ziflow? And we have an integration with our proofing platform with Jira, which we use for our internal project development, or product development, and our marketing team. So that's really laid out by these task cards that represent either different assets or different stages of a project, and there's a whole structure around that, versus our internal project management, which we use Asana for. So that's a pretty typical structure, I think, at organizations, is different departments have different ways they visualize project management. And it can be hard to accomplish the needs of every single department or creative worker with simply just a project management tool. And we often see that the creative side, the creative review and approval, gets left out or is only visualized by one task. Going back to that idea of the iceberg, there's one task card in a project management structure, or one line item that truly might represent 5 or 6 rounds of revision. So really asking these questions about how your overall team wants to visualize and provide visibility into your project plan is really the first step to determining what the right mix of tools and systems are for your team. Once you've determined that, the second question that we always ask people when they're asking us, how do we integrate Ziflow with project management? What should really be the driver of our project tracking is, when you're talking about pushing information between these two systems, the second question you should ask is, do we want to create a task or update a task? And that, again, will help determine which information is moving between your online proofing system and your PM tool. And really you want to determine which system should be the master system of record for your project flow. So kind of a general rule we follow is, if you're using a templated project, say you're doing a repeatable project, you're doing high volume print production that follows typically the same tasks, almost the same tasks every single time, the same general flow. You need to check things off in a certain order. Project management can really provide that repeatable project structure. And you can accomplish this with online proofing as well with our workflow structures. But with templated projects that typically have a high volume and are turning around quickly, and you just need to follow a project plan, you can use online proofing to sort of update your existing project boards, cards, and files. So online proofing is going to push information, this real-time information about your assets, into your existing project plans. So we recommend using project management and that capability to really create these repeatable project templates, and use online proofing to push updates about those different project tasks into your existing project management plan. If you're using a custom project plan, again, using the client example, perhaps you have you offer sort of customized client service to all of your clients, or you're working with different departments that just have different needs or many different types of projects. Again, maybe you're managing a website redesign along with a video launch that they all have very different needs and different project tasks associated with them. In that case, we typically recommend using online proofing to create your project plans, to really drive task creation in your PM system. So online proofing is taking the bulk of that creative activity. You know, there's really detailed review and approval that's happening. There's probably a lot of versioning that's going on. And you want to use all of that activity in your online proofing to really build your project management structure, because that work is happening rapidly and there's a lot of updates being made in your on your proofs. So it's not really a hard and fast rule, but something we recommend. Really think about, are our projects templated? What level of work is repeatable? And that will help drive your automation between these two systems. So a good example for sort of a complex flow is this image on the right. You know, you can use online proofing to use version creation to update, say, a Basecamp project. So when a new file is uploaded into a Google Drive folder, that is then, you know, converted and created into a proof. And then that new proof is then pushed into your Basecamp existing Basecamp team project. It says, you know, a new version is ready for review. Perhaps it creates a new task, a new to-do list for the team member or multiple team members. And then that notification can also be pushed to Slack. So really thinking about the template and the way the information should flow between both your assets, your actual files, creative files, and how that relates to tasks and to-do lists in your project management system will really help determine how do we cut down a lot of the manual work between these two systems, and how do we allow creative teams to do the work they need to do with you know, the project management structure of the entire project that we're working on. So those are really two primary questions that we always tell people to ask themselves or to evaluate internally before you even think about which project management tool or which proofing system is right for us. And the really benefit once you answer those two questions is thinking about using online proofing as a way to bring meaning and context into your project workflow. So you have your project structure, your project plan, but again, about 80 to 90% of the effort in a creative project is typically spent on review and approval. So evaluating how much time are you actually spending building the assets. So your designers are working in InDesign or Adobe products, you know, how much time are they actually spending in those other systems, then exporting those files into a system where someone can review them. You know, perhaps you're currently updating or attaching those files to your PM system, or you're using online proofing sort of wherever they're living. You know, how much time is really spent on that? How much time is spent viewing the asset, you know, opening it and reviewing it, how much time is spent on revision. So all of those actions can really be a line item in a project management plan. And it's very unreasonable to think about building every single one of those items out into your project management structure, because then you would have probably 200 tasks for maybe just one version of an asset. And that asset, you know, is tied to multiple other assets into a larger project. So it is difficult to visualize that bulk of that effort that's happening behind the scenes within a project plan. You could certainly do it, but it would probably quickly overwhelm your project management system and look like a pretty gnarly project outline. So again, I just want to drive home the point of this idea of visibility, of how do you create visibility without creating additional work, without having to have someone go in and add in tasks for all of this sort of invisible work that's happening on the review and approval side and the versioning side of a project. So we really recommend using online proofing workflows to enable creative teams to really account for and control this work. So instead of having to bake this all into your project plan, instead of having your designers, upload a new version and then go into your project management system and have to check off every time they've uploaded a new asset or every time someone has approved something they've created, online proofing can really just drive this information and help both reduce the manual amount of this invisible work that's already happening. And it can also help codify some of those roles that are happening in the review and approval process. So within your project management structure, you may have a task that says, first round of revision or first draft, or maybe that's even just a line item into a larger stage. And you may know as a project manager that X amount of people need to review that, but it's a bit difficult to code that into project management. What online proofing does is it allows you to take all those rules around these project rules around who needs to review what at what stage and really bake it into a workflow that's happening behind the scenes of your project plan. And most importantly, it's connecting those rules to the actual files and assets and versions that are being created. So instead of requiring everyone to jump into different tasks and open different cards to simply access a file or a version, that's all being automated behind the scenes. And there's one place to see all of the assets and the current status. And I'll talk a little bit in a bit about how that's plugged into your PM tool. So really, online proofing is complementary to project management system in the way that it just brings so much more context to your project files and project workflow in a way that is just really difficult to visualize within a PM tool. The second benefit of integrating online proofing into your project management tool is giving your creative workers one space for detailed revisions and collaboration. Again, going back to this idea of, we find it's difficult for creative workers to really do all of the detailed markup on an asset that they need to in a PM tool. So the project structure is great for everyone involved in the project, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty of marking up an asset, collaborating on minutia around where text is laid out, where coloring, the many different things that need to be revised as you're developing creative work can be really difficult to accomplish in a PM tool. So what online proofing does is give one space for not just creative review and approval and tracking approvals, but giving creative workers an additional space to do these markups and collaboration that just isn't always possible in a project management tool. So project management does have some proofing capabilities, but it's really not at the level that creative teams need. And I want to talk a little bit about, show a little bit about how this integration works in practice. So these are all really, really kind of high level strategy things to determine before you start integrating your PM tool with online proofing, or really considering, do we need online proofing in addition to a project management tool that we're already using? So if you need, comment streams that go several layers deep, side-by-side revisions, real-time decision and actions, those can be accomplished in one system and then pushed into your project management environment. And I think this idea that this is going to create more work for different, for the entire team really doesn't hold much water, because your creative workers are already looking for a way to accomplish these really detailed collaboration elements, and they're just not going to do it in a PM tool. They're going to be marking off tasks that will help your overall project management, but they're still going to be accomplishing this somehow. Usually it's over email. It's either in the systems they're using to create these assets. So really, online proofing is so complementary to your project management structure, because you're allowing project managers to work in one space, and you're allowing your creative team to accomplish all of the review tasks that they need to in another space, and combining those together in a way that just eliminates the manual work that is typically associated with using two systems. So I'm going to show very briefly how this works in practice with Monday.com, which is something that we typically is a pretty common integration that we see. So this is just one way that you can visualize a project. So this team has organized their projects based on something, all of the assets or projects that are in design, and it's really phased by the design process. So you can see here what we've done is proofs to review is one subsection of their project plan. So you have things that are in design, and then proofs that have been created. And you can see here this kind of halfway down the page, this pink task is pulling in the status of that proof. So you can see changes were required. This is an in-flight asset or project that needs further review and revision. And again, it's very easy to visualize how this one task is representing a multitude of activities that are happening behind the scenes and that are happening in online proofing. But that status is being pulled in from the online proofing system. So what happens is the designer, in this case, probably designer, is responsible for implementing those changes. So they can go into their online proofing system and create a new version and just upload it, upload the file directly. It will update some of the properties of the proof. And then once the review and approval has happened around that proof in online proofing, the proof and workflow properties are being updated as that activity is happening. So the status, the different approval decisions are being marked on this proof. And once all of that activity is happening in real time, that's being pushed back into Monday.com. So you can see that this simple one task that represents all of that activity is now updated to it's been approved. So that one approval status may represent 5 different approvals from 5 different stakeholders. But instead of having to build each one of those actions into this Monday.com board, it can simply just be pulled in from online proofing. So a really good example of how a project structure can remain clean and simple, but still have all of the information that a project manager and any team member would need to understand a quick snapshot of where that asset or that project element is. So it's pulling in the status, the version from online proofing, and then you can again see the list of proofs. So it's a really great way to sequence this information without overloading either system and enabling everyone to accomplish the work they need to without having to manually manage 2 different systems. So just a really quick example of once you've determined how are we going to create our project plan, how do we want to structure it, and then how is our creative team interacting with these assets, and how does this information need to flow between 2 systems. It'll really be a different answer for every organization, but asking those 2 questions and then using that to build your integration and information flow is so helpful to determining what's the best flow of information for your organization. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the benefits of what happens when you do an integration like this. Again, we talk about not overloading your team, and I think we'll talk a little bit about why that's so important.
Great stuff, Katie. Thank you so much for that walkthrough. And as Katie said, let's talk about what we've seen as benefits across the 2 solutions. And first off, we'll talk about one that hopefully we've proven out quite a bit. And essentially what I want to say that is 1 + 1 doesn't have to equal 5. And by that, I don't mean a lot of extra work and overhead. So having the 2 systems integrated closely, project management and online proofing, it will streamline the process overall. And it might seem kind of counterintuitive at first with there being somewhat similar types of information in 2 different repositories, but it will reduce the time burdens of all of those involved in the process. So for example, and I think the easiest example is a project manager can build the structure that they prefer without requiring manual project updates into 2 systems. And those that are in the process daily, the designers, the copywriters, and compliance team members, they're not forced to use an ill-fitting solution, one that they're not used to, or they prefer not to use, or one that they're just going into, again, to do those manual updates. They don't have to use them to provide their comments and markups. So we talk about automation quite a bit here at Ziflow, and this is definitely a case for automation, which reduces that burden on providing updates manually. So, you know, those in the roles that need to do specific types of work, they can really focus on that. So like, for example, like the creative workers that Katie talked quite a bit about, they can focus on asset creation, revisions, improvements, and those overall campaign needs without necessarily without necessarily thinking, how am I going to make time to continually update my project management tasks. And then, you know, those that are kicking off the review and approval tasks, the designers and the writers or the project managers, they don't have to work out of a PM system to accomplish those complex, you know, what I would say is their approval workflows. In the workflows is really where a lot of the action takes place. So having a purpose-built solution for that is definitely a benefit. The next benefit is around that major theme we touched on today, which is visibility. Each team, large or small, can get their updates and information via their preferred channels. It's, again, you know, it's really one of our first webinars that we ever did at Ziflow. We talked quite a bit about is, you know, letting teams work in systems that they're most comfortable with, and that's definitely a benefit here of integrating these two technologies. And it's about visibility. And this is doubly important for high profile projects that also require executive level approval. So alignment and visibility is really at the core of both project management and online proofing. It's the core of, you know, really the value propositions of both. So having them work together, it just pays major dividends in terms of allowing teams, again, large and small, accomplish more together. And, you know, what I would add to that is they're accomplishing more together, but in the apps that they prefer. And I think that's a really important concept here with regards to the visibility, is that does definitely lend to making visibility easier to achieve. And lastly, and this can't be overstated for those with an agency client type of model, the integration of these two technologies, and we see it every day. We've actually done a webinar just on this with one of our customers. The integration of these two technologies and processes at large, it really does improve the client management and really just relationships, you know, to make it, maybe even make it a little bit more personal than just management. And here, what I'm really talking about is being proactive with clients and other external team members. So simply obviating the need for the where is this email, or the email asking for an update or a status. Over time, there's a massive compounding benefit of both time, but also quality of relationship. I think that's something that you can't really overstate. That if you're providing updates to your stakeholders via the applications that they use every day, and it saves you from you know, a late call or a kind of a frenzied request for an update on a project, it really does have, you know, positive future effects on that type of relationship for sure. So wow, here we are at the key takeaways slide. That was a lot. Thanks for hanging in there with us so far. Before we do get to the Q&A, let's just look at a few takeaways. And as I mentioned, everyone will receive a copy of today's presentation a little bit later today, so don't worry about writing these down. But really, I think today's key takeaways are, you know, creative review and approval. It's not necessarily a project management challenge. The creative process, I think all of you already know this, and hopefully we've maybe highlighted some ways where it's distinct. It really is comprised of a unique set of actions and collaboration requirements that do require purpose-built tools and capabilities. So these actions should enhance and complement your overall project plan. So, you know, I do talk about this quite a bit with when we talk to new customers, new prospects, is people learning about online proofing, is that really creative review and approval is not really a project management challenge. And so the next takeaway I think that Katie really hit on really well is before comparing or integrating project management with online proofing, You really want to evaluate how your team structures projects and tasks, and those invisible processes that we talked about, the below the water type of processes that may not be represented in each project or task. This will really help drive which system best fits your need, and also which one, where data is going to reside over one system over another. And that kind of goes into the next point, which is about visibility. So maintaining visibility for projects which have a wide stakeholder base is really key to driving alignment. But it doesn't require really like this copy paste mentality to duplicate information in the systems. You can be really smart about the data shared and replicated or passed. And I think, again, this is about automation, but it's also, you know, your online proofing system can help drive this back and forth with your PM system for sure. And then last but not least, kind of the point that I just made on the previous slide, working with external collaborators was the original remote working, if you think about it that way. So agency client type of structures are excellent opportunities to create channels of both visibility, but also just as importantly, alignment. Yeah, so for those of you on the call, and I think there are several of you on the call today with an agency client relationship, this can definitely be a nice benefit to your business. So let's jump into Q&A, and I did see a couple of questions pop up during the course of today's call, so let me just grab those really quick. Let's see here. So I actually need to get out of full screen for 1 second. Oops, sorry about that. Let me go here. Let me get the Q&A up and move it over here. Sorry about that. And then I'll present again. So the first question, and Katie, I'm going to turn this one over to you. And I just talked about it. Is, you know, well, I touched on the subject anyway. How much should we look to automate between the two systems when they're integrated? It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And something that we've talked about on previous webinars is not over automating every single task. And the level of automation that you need to really see returns in terms of team-wide efficiency and visibility is actually quite low. So simply pushing things like version updates, status updates, these small properties that are on a proof or just small actions taken around an asset that's part of your project plan really can reduce the manual work that your team is doing and just increase visibility so people can make decisions and understand where things are in the process. So it really depends. I think, again, going back to this idea of, are you working in multi-stage projects? You know, are there certain gates that need to happen between different stages of a project? So if you're breaking down, going back to this idea of a website redesign, you have a whole development process. You know, what decisions and actions need to happen before that can move into, say, the design process, which will incorporate so many different tasks and subtasks and sub workflows, and understanding how those workflows can automate between the two systems can seem like a big, overwhelming and scary integration to do, but it really, again, comes down to your project plan and understanding what are the key drivers of information that move things forward in a project, and what level of templating do we use within our projects. So that will help determine the level of integration that you need. But I think these small pieces of information that are being pushed between online proofing and project management can really make a huge difference no matter your team size. And this actually comes up a lot where we see creative teams or even, you know, large organizations, they look at an enterprise project management tool and they say, this just has too many bells and whistles for us. What we really need is this proofing capability and review and approval. And we just need to push certain moments of information into our project management system. You know, we don't need our project management system to incorporate all of this. So it comes back to that idea of asking yourself those two questions of, how do we think about our project plans? Are they templated or not? And really using that to drive the level of information automation you want to push into your project management system.
Oh, that's great, Katie. Yeah, there were a couple of questions about how much you should look to automate between systems. You touched on it a little bit, Katie. And there was another question that came up while you were answering, and there's actually a few questions that kind of fit into the same model. But um, does it matter in which order you deploy these two technologies in? I think it's an interesting question, and I personally think it's more mainly driven by where the bulk of the work is being done or where the biggest pain points lie. But I wanted to open up to you, Katie, and see if you have any perspective based on your discussions.
Yeah, I don't think the order matters. I think what we see a lot is that teams of a certain size already have a PM tool in place, and they're really looking for online proofing to enhance all of that behind the scenes creative work that's happening. So again, to improve the visibility. So it already kind of depends on what you have in place, your organization already. From a Ziflow integration standpoint, it doesn't really matter. We can integrate with pretty quickly with and most PM tools. So that Monday.com integration I showed, fairly quick and easy to set up, depending on how much you have already have built out. So I think the order doesn't matter, but back to your point of where's the real pain point? Is the pain point in project managers not having that visibility into what's happening on the creative review and approval side? Is it tough to track approvals for certain tasks and assets? Is it just difficult to manually create tasks that accurately represent certain stages like design or final review and approval? Or is the pain point really on the proofing side? Is it difficult? Are you forcing creative teams to try and manage markups and proofing and detailed version comparison, in a proofing tool that may not have that level of proofing detail that your creative team needs? So just evaluating what are we currently using and what's the biggest pain point between different teams that need to collaborate to get projects done.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely, I think it's definitely rooted in where the biggest challenge or maybe where the biggest optimization or benefit can be, realized first. If it's an organization that's developing a ton of creative content on a regular basis, it may make sense to, get an online proofing process in place to, identify, some larger range project management efficiencies down the line. So yeah, it's a great question. What looks to be our last question is, are alarms available to make sure approval timelines are followed? I can speak specifically for, Ziflow and online proofing for sure. Is that we do have late proof notification and also reminders as well. And one of the future enhancements that we are planning on is to incorporate that into your project management system as well, to be able to send those late notices 2 p.m. Most of the time, what we've seen is our customers that are using us with the project management tool already have their existing alarms set in PM for the broader stakeholder base. But yeah, definitely within Ziflow for sure. You can set proof deadlines and also automate reminders as well when those deadlines are nearing and also have passed. So great question. Great question. I think that's it. Yeah, it does look like that was the last question. So I'm going to go to our beautiful end cap slide here. And I want to thank everyone for attending. Katie, thank you so much for riding shotgun with me on this call today. I learned a lot and I appreciate your time and effort and all that. And I want to thank all of you for attending, all of you for hanging with us through the end today. As I mentioned, you will get a copy of today's presentation a little bit later today, and we'll be reaching out to you soon about our next webinar. With that, I just want to say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.